Hey, you guys, it is Lisa Alexander, Executive Director here at Stand Up Survivor. I'm excited for tonight's live. So come on in here and make sure, like what I'm going to do is make sure that you share it with someone who definitely needs to see it tonight. I have a return guest that I'm excited to have, Gillis. Hey, Katie.
Hi.
Hi, I'm so excited to have you back. So we are going to get started. I'm going to give everybody just a second to pop on. Oh, goodness, that was me. Gillis is a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist who has a private practice and is just such an influencer when it comes to domestic violence in the world of domestic violence and psychotherapy. So welcome, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, I'm excited. Oh my goodness. You know, you're more than welcome to come back as much as you want to because you have so many good things to share with the survivors around the world. So I'm excited to have you. Hey, Michelle,
Hey, Michelle.
when you pop in, let us know where you're tuning in from so that we can say hey, and that we can send some love your way. Hey, you guys. So excited, Katie. So we have a really good topic tonight, you guys. And so this topic kind of stems from, you know what, Katie, you tell them.
All right, so we're going to be talking about post-separation abuse. Right now, you know, many of you who have paid attention to social media or seen things online in the news, there's a lot of stuff going on right now with celebrities, specifically Kanye West and Kim Kardashian with post-separation abuse. And so that kind of like led into a topic for a recent blog post of mine. And I had so much feedback, so many comments and responses to that of people who, you know, many who are like, how is that abuse? And many who were just kind of wanting more clarification. So I really, think that there's definitely a need to have this conversation of what it is and how to recognize it.
Yeah, it's so interesting because a lot of this happens, but because it's in the media, everyone's talking about it.
Yes.
But this happens each and every day. So let's start with Kanye and Kim, right? So for example, what we're seeing in the media, what are some things that we're seeing that we can categorize as abuse?
So the biggest thing right now that we're seeing is the behavior that Kanye is exhibiting is behavior that many perpetrators exhibit at the end of a relationship. And it's something that many survivors have been through, but they just, years ago, we didn't have a word for it. Years ago, it was like, oh, I escaped an abusive situation and the person is retaliating. And that was really the only language that we had to describe it. And now there's a term for it, post-separation abuse. It's when the person is like, oh yeah, you're going to leave me, you're going to pay for it. And that's really what, his behavior, because he's famous and he's in the limelight, we're all seeing his behavior on Twitter and on Instagram and stuff. But stuff like this happens every day with people who aren't famous and who don't have record labels and things like that. So and it's happening every day to survivors.
Yeah, and significantly too, and to the point of you'll even see murder suicides that happen after.
Yes.
I mean, killing the children that happen after. So it's significant, And I don't know if you guys knew that there is a post-separation abuse wheel.
Yep.
And so we will be sharing it after our live for you to keep, for you to download, for you to show your attorneys, for you to educate yourself on so that you're empowered to know what exactly post-separation abuse looks like. And we all know, right, that leaving an abusive relationship, it is the most dangerous time.
I was just about to say that.
Yep, for the survivors. So it's not something that they take lightly. So before we move into what post-separation abuse looks like, let's talk about the survivor who's currently in an abusive relationship and they're contemplating leaving and not leaving, right? Because they see these stories, the abuser has threatened them and they're not sure if it's worth leaving. What if I leave, then it's going to be worse than it is, so I might as well stay.
That's probably one of the most common things I hear from people is, should I leave? I mean, I'm scared of the retaliation of if I leave. And first and foremost, I really want to validate that because that's something that a lot of us can really understand, that fear of sometimes it's easier to just kind of give them what they want, or how can I make this better? And I think for many people, especially trauma survivors, like it's instinctual almost to like make the situation better. So it's instinctual.
We've been doing that the whole time.
Yeah.
We've been doing that to survive the relationship. So doing it in order to escape the relationship, we're going to try to do the same thing, thinking it may work.
And so I definitely want to validate that. And then a lot of people say to me, well, I mean, should I just stay? Would that be easier? And the number one thing I always say to people is, do you really want to be with someone who is capable of treating another human being in that way?
Yeah, that's good. Like, I'm going to ask you to repeat that because I really would like that to sink in for someone. I mean, because oftentimes you and I, we both work with survivors and the abuse is bad. They're in pain. It hurts. but then they're maybe not asking themselves that question. So could you repeat that for them real quick, Katie?
So sometimes, and I'm actually going to, hold up a little sticky note. And this is actually what I tell people. I tell my clients, I say, write this on a sticky note, put it on your mirror. So every morning when you're brushing your teeth, and it should say, do I want to stay with a person who is capable of treating another person in this way?
Yeah. That's good. And you know what? They're treating you that way, but it's also affecting your children. Your children are seeing it, and I always say children are sponges. Children do what we do, not so much of what we say, but are they seeing how you're being treated? Yeah. And is it okay for them to be treated the same way or for them to treat their partner in the future that way? And so it's so important that we set the narrative for what we want in our home, the temperature, even, and for our children. So that's a really great point. And I would always encourage survivors, listen, you don't have to stay just because it's what you're used to. We're not saying that escaping and leaving is easy, but we're saying that you don't deserve to be treated that way. And I always tell survivors this, Katie, bet on yourself. Bet on yourself. You bet on the abuser for a really long time and done everything you could to appease them. Bet on yourself,
And then children too. A lot of people will say to me, my daughter, my child is starting to treat me the way, my partner treats me. And, and I think that right there is really powerful. Like when you see the children start to treat you that way, I think that right there alone is, if you're okay with them treating you like that, but if you're okay with them treating the children like that, I would question, do you want them to treat your child like that? Do you want the children to learn that?
It's a really good point. My ex-husband, it's not always like that but for me, my ex-husband saw his father be abusive to his mother, right?
Yeah.
And so he did the same thing.
Yeah.
Worse, right? And so I'm raising a son and I'm thinking, I don't want my son to be like this. I don't want him to grow up thinking that this is normal. And I don't want my daughter to think that that's how she's supposed to be treated, and that was up to me to decide differently. My children couldn't make that decision. That was something that I had to make. So, all the turmoil, all the pain, that's the decision that I made for my children. I always encourage survivors the same thing. Okay, so they're 18, so they're 15. They've seen it all. That doesn't mean you stay.
It doesn't mean.
It doesn't. So I have a question.
That is such an impressionable age. Teenagers. A lot of times, people think, oh, children, 3 or 5 years old are the ones who are vulnerable. No, the 15-year-old is watching their mom and dad argue.
And that's what they're learning.
The 20-year-old that comes home from college break is watching you put up with, mistreatment.
And we don't want that for them. So it's so important. And I'd like to think, because I remember even my ex-husband, he was so abusive in front of the children. I'm thinking, well, he's not hurting them. But little did I know, of course he was hurting them. How could I think he wasn't, but I didn't know better. And so one of the goals of also making sure that we do these lives is so people can be educated and know different, right? Yeah. So Mariah said children are a product of their environment. Yes. And that's really, really true, and we gauge that. So what about this? So I have a lot of families that I work with or moms who say, well, I'm going to wait until the children are 18, or I'm going to wait until they graduate high school. And that's an individual decision, of course, but there's abuse in the home, right?
See, and that is something that I always struggle with, because it kind of goes back to, again, we have this idea that young children are vulnerable where teenagers aren't. And I always say to people, why 18? Why high school? The teenagers are seeing that. And here it's easy for me to say I've never been divorced. So it's one of those things where it's so easy for me to sit here and say, oh, get a divorce. Divorce, it's one of the hardest things that people will go through, and divorcing with children is one of the most hardest things. So it's not going to be easy. But it's one of those things where, you really have to weigh, do I want my children to be seeing this in high school where they're seeing and hearing everything?
Yeah.
Why wait? Why is 18 more important than, say, 13 or 10?
Right. Great question. Why is this age more different than that age? And I've talked to teenagers and they said, I wish they would have left. I would have much rather lived in a hotel than in the house of horrors or in the house with the music all the time, and making sure that those children do have a voice, because they have feelings. They're seeing and hearing it as well. That even if you feel like, well, it's behind closed doors. I've talked to children who have said, oh, I knew exactly what was happening. I heard my mother crying. I heard, banging and breaking of glass. So it's really important that we take all of that into consideration as survivors. So, all right, let's get into the post-separation, right? And so I'm deciding, like, I want to leave, right? but I'm so afraid of what they're going to do. So many survivors, as you know, Kitty, they may not have enough money, or they would lose everything if they do decide to leave.
Which is true, and it's real. And I always say, I always want to validate that. It is. It's probably going to be rough for a while. You're splitting income in half at the very least. Sometimes many people aren't even fortunate enough to even be contributing half the income, especially if you're home with children. You're not bringing in a financial income, even though you're working more than a full-time job. And so, I always say it's not something that's, going to be easy. So I definitely want to validate that.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah. So what is post-separation abuse? What does it look like? What are some different forms that it can take?
So the biggest way I always describe it is it's like a payback. It's like the perpetrator saying to you, "Oh yeah, you're going to leave me. You're going to get it. You're going to get payback for that." And it's just a way of, getting revenge, revenge for leaving the relationship, payback for leaving the relationship. And it takes many different forms. And sometimes, they'll go after the things that you love the most, especially children, or, employment, career, friends, family, anything that you hold dear. So children are usually the biggest target because, it's the things that you love the most, the people that you love the most are the biggest target. And so they're going to use that to get what they want. Sometimes it's financial gain. Sometimes it's just pure revenge.
Yep. I like you said, it was payback, because literally it is.
Yeah, it is.
They're like big kids who have lost their property or their what they thought that they controlled, and realizing that they did it because the survivor found their voice, found their power, found the strength to leave, or was able to escape some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're going to pay for this, right? And so
absolutely.
You don't own anybody. They don't believe it, but it's a fact. And so that's a really, really important part too. And what's interesting too? What about someone who has never told their family or friends about the abuse? Because we hear that all the time. Like I remember when I didn't really told anybody. So now here I come to my family saying, "Oh no, he was abusive. He beat me. He did this," and they're like, "What are you talking about?
You never told us that. Show us the proof.
He's coming over on Sunday for dinner." So it's like, trying to navigate telling people or getting that support when you've never shared it with anyone.
And that's a huge part too of the payback, because when a survivor leaves, especially if there is any kind of abuse and then there are any kind of protection orders or any kind of court proceedings or anything like that, that's when post-separation abuse tends to really go increase tenfold, because you've outed them and you've said, okay, that this person is abusive. So now they're gonna try to discredit you, and the abuse is gonna increase.
I love that you said outed them, because that's one of their biggest fears ever, right?
Yes.
Is being outed, for people to know who they really are behind closed doors. And that's when they get angry. But I think one of the difficult parts for survivors is that they desperately need the help and support. They desperately are clinging on to dear life. And I think I want to just say something real quick, because oftentimes when you're in an abusive relationship, oftentimes there's a lot of disassociation. You try to bury things, right? And you try to move forward. So when I'm coming out and I'm saying, "Hey, I've been in this relationship," and you're discrediting me, you're discrediting that survivor, you're saying, "Well, where's the proof?" Right? I've had people literally say, "Well, why should we believe them? Where's the proof?" And I find that to be such an unfair statement, right? Why does someone have to show up dead or with bruises or with paperwork, right, to prove that they've been abused?
Yes. And that's what happens, is that the legal system really puts an unfair burden on survivors, and that's the big part of why I wrote my book, because I was like, people are already at probably one of the lowest points in their life, the most stressful points of their life, probably to say the least. Yeah. And then they have to go and navigate the legal system. And it's hard enough to navigate the legal system if you don't have a law degree. I mean, the legal system is purposely set up to confuse everyone. Like, there are people that go and study it, and there seem to be the only ones that can really navigate it. And that's not fair. Like, why do I need a law degree just to go get a protection order? So that was one of the things that I said, I'm privileged. I'm highly educated. I'm articulate. I'm able to go and access the court system because I have a car and I have a flexible schedule, and I could go. What about the people who couldn't? I work with, single moms and people who are working 12-hour shifts down at the mill, and they're like, I can't leave and go to the court system. And I work with people who can't read and write English. I work with people who can't read the court documents. And so it's just gets me, Like,
Oh, it's
tell me
very
about that.
frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
It seems like it's really unfair. And oftentimes we were talking about it the other day, but they get to the point where they just give up. Like, don't
Give
worry about it.
up
Like, I don't want to
because it's
fight.
easier.
Yeah, because it seems easier to do than to stay and fight, because it seems like you're going to court to
Mhm.
show proof, but it's still not enough. And you do talk a lot about that really well in your book, about all the different ways that it becomes too challenging to even
Yeah.
do. And it's interesting too, because you talk about simple things such as having a car to get to the courthouse, right?
Yeah.
Which is huge.
Like, just something like that. Just the privilege of being able to get in my car and drive to the courthouse. The privilege of being able to, have hours in my day that I can go,
Yeah.
because it takes hours. It does. And you have to sit there and wait for it to be
Or
signed.
you work 12 hours a day and they tell you that you have to be in court at 11:30. You're thinking,
Yeah.
well, how am I supposed to do that? Well, then if you don't come, your protection order won't be granted, right? And then we talk about the lawyers who are not affordable for survivors of abuse who are coming
Absolutely.
All of these different tactics are really important. But I want to touch on something real quick when it comes to the abuser using the legal system against the survivor.
Yes.
What that looks like in post-separation abuse.
So that is very common. And I actually, I have a quote in my book where I say, like, the perpetrator almost becomes irrelevant because they use the legal system and they use legal authorities. So DCFS, DHS, depending on what state you're in, Department of Human Services, child abuse allegations are very common. We see this all the time in social services whenever there's a high conflict relationship, a high conflict divorce, which is the legal term that's used for when there's domestic violence, is a high conflict relationship, which I feel is victim blaming. But
I don't like that. Is it really high?
It's like, well, where's the conflict coming from?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so that's one of the most common things that I hear is that in social services as a social worker is the child abuse allegations. Is that's it. He left me, she left me. I'm going to make sure he never sees his kids again. I'm going to make sure that, she's discredited as a mom. And that's one of the most things that we see in social services. And we have to follow up on it, because you can't, even if 99%, of the reports are false,
right?
But what about that one time? So, and they know that they have to follow up on that. So then they're using the authorities to further the abuse.
Or the abuser, like running up legal bills, keeping them in court constantly over and over again.
So common.
Postponing the hearings, or saying they need more time, or asking for an extension to just continue.
I hate, yes.
And there's another part too that you talk about where like not wanting to get served, so they avoid being served.
Yeah, so it's called ducking service. And it's so common that there's actually a name for it, ducking service. And it's like, well, why do we give them so many rights? Just tape it to their door. Okay, of course, I get it. I get that we have rights, that you can't do that. But it's so incredibly frustrating, because it really puts that burden on the victim, on the survivor, to get them served.
Yeah, it's like you're proving that, listen, I was abused. It's this never ending. Yeah. I remember sitting in the courthouse trying to explain to the judge, I was like, Your Honor, he's abusive. And I know that he's going to continue to be abusive no matter what relationship he goes into. I just want to make sure he either gets some help, or that he doesn't get, all of this custody or whatever. And literally the magistrate looked at me and said, so what do you want me to do?
What do you want me to do?
What do you want me to do? And I was just so cross. Like, I don't know pictures and what else can I show you?
What else can you show?
What else can I show to say that my children do not deserve to be in a home where there is abuse? And if I could find the strength to escape, can you help me keep them safe too? It's like screaming at the top of your lungs, and no one's really listening to you.
And there's so many, like, the legal system really is set up. Our legal system in the United States really is set up to, protect criminals. And what I mean by that is that we would rather have a guilty person go free than to lock up an innocent person. That's the basis of our legal system, and I understand. However, what ends up happening is that the burden of proof is so strong on victims that it almost becomes just so cumbersome and so burdensome that
because as a survivor, right? If you as experiencing abuse, you're not thinking, let me take a picture of that. Let me write this down. On this day, this person did that to me. So you're in the midst
camera on.
Tornado. You're in the midst of this tornado, just trying to keep your sanity and trying to keep your safety. And you're telling me that I need to document everything that's happening. By the time you get to the point of being ready to document or take pictures, it's been going on for so long. It's been so that you've missed 98% of the abuse that you've experienced, and trying to grab this 2% to show proof that you deserve vindication and to be heard and deserve safety. It's a very backwards kind of twisted system, but it leaves the survivor out in the cold. And it's like, I don't know how many different ways we can like say this,
It's
but
true. And one of the biggest things too that I see a lot is where like the abusive partner tends to have more money, and so they have more power, so they can afford, the high powered attorney. They can keep filing all the motions, and then the other person that's just trying to work their 9 to 5 and get by, it makes it so they almost have to quit their job.
But actually, that's like a tactic of the abuser, because if you're not working, how I can show the courts that you can't financially
you're
provide.
An unfit mom
because
you're not working.
You can't financially care for the children, so therefore they should be with me. Katie, this is what we do. So we see it all the time. But even I'm looking in the comments, and it's heartbreaking.
I'm looking at the comments
because it's just unbelievable to just see how this is so perpetrated in the field of domestic violence, in the area of domestic violence. It's heartbreaking.
I know it is heartbreaking to hear these.
It is. Even just starting the court orders, like showing up, there's a restraining order place, but they still, it's just a piece of paper. They continue to threaten you. They continue to, do things the court order tells them not to, completely disregarding the court orders that are in place, and you feel like, well, what am I supposed to do? What else can I do? And I think that's why what we do, Katie, is so important. Our goal is to give a voice to survivors, a face to what this looks like. Okay, so let's move on, right? So some of the financial is in 99% of abusive relationships that occurs, right? But when we're leaving, what are some tactics that abusers use in the financial part of post-separation abuse?
Probably the number one thing that I see a lot of times is the one who has the prominent source of income. It will, when the relationship ends, they'll shut off phones, shut off utilities, maybe stop paying the mortgage, that kind of stuff. And, their excuse is like, why should I pay for the phones? I can't, live in my house anymore. Why should I pay for the utilities? And, well, because you have minor children living there. And judges will put a court order, and they will hold them in contempt of court usually if they do that. However, the burden is then on the victim again to have to go in, file the paperwork, file the motion, come back into court. Then they ask for an extension. And so in the meantime, you've had 6 weeks of no power when you're living in, Minnesota and it's freezing.
Right. It's just so hard. And even when you talked about going back and forth to the courts, that's more time, that's more money, that's more daycare, that's more figuring out, trying to get time off of work if you have a job. It's just this convoluted combination of stuff that's really, really difficult. What about the no child support and alimony, right? Refusing to do the things that are literally in your court order. I remember walking out of court and with our order, and he looked at me, said, and he put his middle finger up, and he said, tell the judge that. And literally has never once, and I've been gone maybe, 12 years now, have never once complied with our order at all. Just doesn't comply with it at all. And who's holding him accountable, right?
Exactly, because it would have to be a full-time job for you to hold them accountable, to pull them into court, file paperwork, and then have the 3 to 5, continuations. It just, you lose more money in the long run.
Yeah. I think what you just said was so golden. Like, defending yourself becomes a full-time job.
It does become
in the middle of the room. You're screaming at the top of your lungs and you're saying, listen to me, this happened to me, this is what they're doing. And still, it's like no one is hearing you. It's relentless sometimes.
And the judge often gets annoyed with the victim.
Well, of course, because we're highly emotional. We've been traumatized. No one is listening. We're jumping through hoops, and they're sitting over there maybe with their attorney. Someone even just said with their high power attorney, and it happens all the time.
It is so common.
Someone said in the comments that they left in 2020 and they won't stop going to a hearing next week because they're suing for court costs. Can you imagine? I mean, honestly, after years of abuse, it's the same. And
suing for court costs. And a lot of times, I mean, I've been to court many times with clients going through this, and I've seen most judges I've seen won't entertain court costs. However, disclaimer is I live in Louisiana. So
yeah, that's true.
That might be different in your state.
Yeah, in the States,
but most judges are just, they don't want to, deal with that. So again, but you got to sit there and you got to wait, because the thing is with court, and a lot of people don't know this, you have to sit there and wait for all of the other trials ahead of you. It's not like you show up at 2:00 and your trial's at 2:00. I mean, you could show up at 8 a.m. and you're seen at 2:00.
Yeah, much less. That's childcare. time off of work, and
emergency childcare. Yeah.
Yep. So let's talk about the harassment and stalking part of it, which kind of we've seen recently in the media, right?
Yes.
So we have the harassment and the stalking, showing up at the job, threatening, calling 30, 40, 50 times a day, that kind of thing.
And so a lot of times what happens, a lot of people don't really know about stalking. And when I say a lot of people, even law enforcement, they don't know that stalking is more than just someone walking up to your front door and someone following you around and someone calling you. Those are all things that usually on a protection order are explicitly stated as being illegal, as being a violation of the order. However, stalking is constantly like that gray area where, they're monitoring you on social media. They're talking about you on social media, like what Kanye is doing with these posts about her, and then sharing conversations, and then bragging that she's scared that he's showing these conversations. Driving by someone's house, and the police will say, oh, well, they had to drive by anyway because they had to go to the store, or they didn't get out of the car. Or and it's always, again, the law is always set up to give the perpetrator the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. And that's really hard for survivors, because all you're doing is constantly trying to prove why you deserve the support, like monitoring, reporting where they're going. So I don't remember the name, but maybe somebody could put in the comments, the little iPhone things that there was just a news report about how abusers have been using them to track their victims. And I mean, I'm not an iPhone user anyway, but I know that there's a lot of different ways, the cloud or other ways that they can use to stalk you.
Yes.
It's really important to acknowledge those things. I always tell survivors, even that we work with, all of that stuff has to go, because it's a way for them to track you and find you and stalk you. They can read your emails, your text messages, listen to your voicemails, all of that.
And it's things too that a lot of us don't even think about. I always tell people, go through, change every single password, even the password to your Lowe's account. If you're thinking, why are they going to go into your Lowe's account? Because I've seen situations where they call Lowe's and they report, you as your account as theft. They call your car. Yeah, I mean your the people who finance your car, and they make trouble there. They call your mortgage company and they make trouble there. Even if they don't have your password, they're calling and they're making trouble, reporting you as fraud, just doing things just to make trouble.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You would think automatic, and I always tell survivors, oh, no. This is what they say. I promise, Katie. Oh, they don't know that password, or they don't know.
No,
anyway.
It doesn't matter.
Change it. Change everything from your emails to your change everything. It's important.
Everything. And I always tell people, get it in writing with your mortgage company, any of your credit cards, and your car payment, anything like that. Get it in writing that they are not to talk to that person, because I've seen it where they'll call the mortgage company and stop payments. They'll call cell phone companies and they'll stop payments. They'll stop direct deposits. Get it in writing that they cannot speak with your mortgage company.
Yeah, I've seen them change. I've seen an abuser leave and still have access to the mortgage, change the name on the deed, everything.
Yes.
I mean, all of this they're still doing.
Yes.
And someone said put a freeze on your credit too, especially if they know your social security number.
Yes, that's a good one. Thank you, Jessica. Yes, that's another thing that I was going to say. Make sure that you monitor. It's worth the $12 for the year, whatever, for Experian or what. Monitor your credit, because this is your partner of however many years. They have your social security number. Most of us have our partner's social security number at some point. They have your birth date. They know your
grandmother's name. They know your dog's name. They know your date of birth. You know what I mean? Yeah, we got to get, and I know it's can be annoying, it can be frustrating, but it's life-saving, and it's really important, because when they're in their revenge stage, right, or their payback stage, you're the one that they're coming for, so you have to protect yourself, as annoying and frustrating as it may be.
When they're in that stage, when they're seeking revenge, you're dealing with someone who is not rational. Yeah.
They've lost their prized possession, right? Because they look at survivor as their property, and they've lost that. You have found your voice and your strength, and they do not like it. And so they want to make you pay. Another thing that they'll do, don't get me wrong, they're all not looking at, they all may not be wanting to be vindictive. You'll see, for example, when Kanye sent a truckload of flowers, right? Or they try to over romanticize things, or buy your favorite food and send it to you, or send you flowers at your job. They may not come angry. They may come with forms of love and things that they know you like, playing your favorite song, things like that. So you have to be able to watch out for all of those as well.
And a lot of times people will say to me, I don't want to let my employer know what's going on. This is extremely embarrassing. And I always say, just let them, because that way when they show up with flowers for the third time in a week, they show up with coffee again and again, that way people at your job know, okay, this is an unwanted, visit. They can stop them at the door.
Yep. And it could save your life. I mean, how many times have we turned on the television and seen the abuser walk into the job, shoot the victim, as well as their co-workers and everybody else? It's not, this is a thing, right? It's not a pride thing. It can't be a pride thing. It's past.
That's why I say, I understand it's embarrassing. I understand I've been there. But
your life, yes, I remember it's so important. I remember you talk about that in your book. It's not pride. You got to put that to the side.
You have to. And I understand. I do. I want to validate that. It's embarrassing to say to your boss who signs your paycheck, look, this person is bothering me. Can you please don't let them in the door?
Yeah. And you realize that could save your life.
And it can,
the people around you, big time. It's really, those are really, really important things to do. Thank you so much.
I think it was Michelle who said that they've lost control and they want to, and that's what it's about, is control. I just echo that.
Absolutely. It's all about control. Do not think for a second they just love me so much. It's about control. They lost property, and so they want to try to get it back. And then she's talking about how she's 2 years out and they just started driving by the house again. I always tell people this, Katie. It's like there's a safety plan, right, for leaving. Then there's a safety plan for staying gone. There's a safety plan that you may have to put in for a 3-year span time. You have to be able to protect yourself at different points of leaving the abusive relationship. Because I want to jump into our next topic, like the smear campaign, the flying monkeys, utilizing friends and family to hurt you.
Mm-hmm. The smear campaign is something that is used to really discredit you. And a lot of times you'll see that with an abusive person, is that they seem to love social media. So you'll see like those long, like dissertation posts, with, they seem to love doing those, as that's their MO. And, they'll say, oh, well, she's a horrible mother because she does drugs. And I used to find alcohol bottles and, You'll see just stuff that it just is completely, it just doesn't make sense. It's kind of out of left field. And I always tell people, to expect it, to your coworkers, to your job, family members, friends, because they're trying to discredit you, especially if they have been abusive or if they have tendencies to be abusive, because they know that, okay, if they out me, then, my cover is blown. So I need to beat them to the, beat them to it. And I need to go in and discredit them. And if I can go and say, I can immediately discredit this person and say, oh, he's this, he's a bad dad, he's this, I'm going to write it all over social media. Then there you go. Your friends have seen it. Your coworkers have seen it. Your family has seen it. So anything you're going to say about me, well, I've got my bases covered now. And so
it's so funny too, because it's like, well, she just drinks all the time. I find, I do drink. I have a glass of wine once in a while, but they're going to make it 10 times worse. And so to make you look bad, it's all part of the campaign. It's true. Yep. She's unfit. She has mental health issues. So they may use that. I've seen that a lot.
I've seen that one a lot.
Mental health diagnosis, or maybe they are on medication, or maybe their mother was, whatever the case may be, but they're going to use it against you. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a common one. Or like if someone is in the medical field or the mental health field, they're using their field, as a platform to get ahead. No, she's a nurse. I have a client who's a nurse, and then, and her partner's like, oh, no, she's just using, her knowledge. She's a psych nurse, and she's, using her knowledge of the mental health field, to manipulate the system.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily.
One of the things that people always talk about is they make accusations, to DCF, or I don't know what you guys call it there, but to the court systems and thing about them being a bad parent or abusive parent or stuff like that, or like neglectful. Allegations of child abuse are really, really big, because it literally, like you said, they have to investigate. They have to investigate,
and they know that.
Allegations. Yeah, and so I just wanted to reiterate that, because I know sometimes, what it's not true, but if they get that phone call, they do have to. So we're talking about post-separation abuse, you guys, right? And oftentimes after you decide to escape or leave the relationship, you do have to deal with this that happens afterward. One of the things is having to deal with the abuser after you leave, right?
Yes.
So what are some things that you suggest doing after that? I know we talked about not engaging and things like that with the abusers.
So the smear campaign, I really like to focus on that a lot, because I feel like the smear campaign really encompasses everything. Like stalking can be part of a smear campaign. Harassment can be part of it. the posting all over social media, the trying to, discredit you as a parent, discredit you as a worker, as a nurse, as a lawyer, as a doctor. So really what I tell people is, and this is, bear with me because this is going to sound weird, do not engage. Do not engage with it. Do not post your own thing back and saying, oh yeah, well, he said this about me. Well, don't do it. Don't do it. Because if you have any kind of court trial or any kind of court dealings with the court, it will come up. So don't do it. The other thing I always tell people is really pick your battles. If they're saying that you drink a lot, you can't disprove that. If they're saying that you cheated in the relationship, you can't disprove that. However, if they're putting false allegations to your licensing board, if they're putting false allegations to DCFS for child abuse, put your energy in that. Try to disprove that, because that is something that is going to affect you in the long run. It's going to affect you with your children. Of course, it's going to affect you with your employment. The drinking, all the other stuff. If they say, oh, she never wears socks under her shoes, like they're going to say all this random stuff just
to rile you up. It's to rile you up and
to get a reaction.
Mm-hmm. And it's to get a reaction. So you talk a little bit about, I think you call it the Neb System. And it's
yes.
I love that you say, first of all, do not engage, right? And do not go back and forth. That's what
not go back and forth.
They know how to push your buttons. They've lived with you for how long? You've been in a relationship for how long? They know what to say and how to say it, right? And what things or what they may bring up, a deceased parent or relative, or something happening with a child, or something happening in your life that's so personal. In order
really
to hurt
inappropriate, like cruel things that
intentionally to hurt you. Don't give into it, right? And I know you're tired of being the bigger person. I know that you're tired of.
I know, y'all.
We get it. We get that. We've been there.
I get it.
Right? But it's like what Katie just said. You got to pick your battles. You can't ever really fight every battle. But when it comes to your relationship, when it comes to healing and moving forward, you're dealing with your children, I would just encourage you not to pick every battle, but strategic one. So let's talk about the Neb method, right?
So Neb, NEB, is necessary, emotionless, and brief. And that is a set of techniques that I came up with for when you have to engage. And so this is specifically if you have to, co-parent, parallel parenting. It's specifically if you have to have any kind of communication with them, because the best thing, as we know, is no communication.
If possible, no contact.
No contact.
If possible. However,
if you have to, like if you're picking up little Johnny at 2:00 for him to come over for the weekend, you have to have communication. They're going to try to get under your skin during pickups and drop-offs and all that stuff. So I always tell people, is it necessary? Is the communication necessary? If they're emailing you and saying, hey, I'm going to be late dropping off little Johnny, or I'm picking up a little Johnny at 2, that's necessary communication. If they're emailing you and saying like, oh, his socks were dirty when he arrived and we had to stop and get new socks, and so, okay, don't respond to it, because he's just trying to get into a back and forth. Second thing, emotionless. It should be like you're responding to the CEO of your company, very like, yes, 2:00 is good. Thank you.
That's good. Yep.
Yeah. Not, oh, we agreed that it would only be 3:00 on Friday. No. They do not get into it. Don't have any emotion. And then brief, 1 sentence or more. I always tell people, like, those of us who remember when Twitter was 120 characters, like a tweet. Don't, if you're starting to add commas and too many periods, it's too long. 1 sentence. 2 sentences.
Or you're reading it over and over again to see if this is a good thing to say. Keep it simple. I like that. So necessary. Is it necessary? Oftentimes abusers are going to try to have you engage in all kind of things that are not necessary. Are we doing Easter? This is one of the ones that get me. Let's go out for family dinner. It's little Johnny's birthday. Right? Okay, Katie, I'm going to give you that one. Well, we haven't all been together in a while. Let's all go to dinner. Katie, how do you respond to that one?
That's such a hard one, because the kids are always going to be used, as a manipulation tool, because then if you don't want to go, well, look, your mom or your dad doesn't want to come. And can you believe that? And then the child's going to feel bad. So my thing with that is always, depending on your court arrangements, and, many of you may have different, custody and court arrangements and stuff like that. But I always say, really think on it. And the number one thing the number one thing I always tell people is don't respond to that right away. If they're asking for any kind of thing that's outside of like the custody agreement, think for 4 to 6 hours before responding, unless you have to respond within a certain amount of time. But
that's good. I like pausing and giving yourself that time, because the truth of the matter is you really need to know you can celebrate John on his birthday, and so can we. It's all manipulation.
Separate celebrations.
Yeah, exactly. The abuser wants to kind of hook you back in, take you to your favorite restaurant, buy you a sweet gift or something. So it's really important that you start to set the narrative for how you want it to go forward. And I remember I was working with a survivor for a long time, and she was like, she'd send like all these long things that he would say. There's only really 1 or 2 words that you need to reply back. Okay, no. I mean, and honestly, it was frustrating for him, because it was like, I'm not going to give you permission to get into my emotions and control where my emotions go from moment to moment. No, because the truth of the matter is they're just trying to pull you back in, like somebody said, pull you back in, get a reaction out of you, like Jessica said, right? So that they can use their reaction against you. But see, if she was so afraid of me, or if he was so afraid of me, why would they come to dinner with me? Why did they come to dinner with us on Friday if they were so afraid? And here you are. Oh, well, because it was little Johnny's birthday. I'm telling you, listen, me and Katie can tell you, this is all a manipulation tactic by the abuser.
Unfortunately.
It is unfortunate, because you think, oh, that would be really nice. Little Johnny can see us all together for his birthday, not knowing that the abuser is literally using that as a tactic against you, because I promise you they will bring that up in court. You're asking for a restraining order, but then you're going to dinner with them. You know,
and unfortunately, so many of us, especially people who, come from, families where parents have been divorced, and we've seen that, like, so many of us are like, oh, I don't want my kids to go through that, and so, it really speaks to that, because then so many of us are saying, oh, okay, well, I'll do the dinner thing, because I really want to have, that perfect co-parenting relationship, that would be ideal, but.
Yeah, and we have to remember that just because we didn't have it and we would like it to be ideal, this situation is not ideal.
It's not with this person.
It's not with this person. And so trying to recreate that is going to be more of a detriment to it. So I like emotionless, right? Just like you said, responding to your boss or your, yes, no, thank you, goodbye, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. 4
o'clock at Target.
That's it. And it's going to be like, well, I was thinking Publix. What do you think about that instead? Because I was thinking Walmart.
We can get a coffee first.
We can get a coffee first. And let's talk about little Johnny's soccer game. Guys, I know it sounds really simple, but I'm telling you, these conversations happen, and you're going to need to know how to respond. So emotionless, very black and white, very gray rocks, no emotions. Keep it simple, right? And keep it brief. The B stands for brief.
Yes.
Keep it short.
Very brief. Keep it short. I tell people like an old school Twitter, 160 characters, 2 sentences. If you're getting to where you're adding too many sentences, then go back and cut and paste.
So I know we talked a little bit earlier, actually, before we actually went live, about like Our Family Wizard and different apps that are used for the court system to communicate.
So Our Family Wizard is one that I've had recommended. I've seen it recommended many times in court to many of my clients. It's called Our Family Wizard, and it's basically an app where you're texting. I'm not sure if it's email too, but I think it's basically like a written form of communication, either text or email, and it's monitored by the court. So like anything that they say is monitored by, the judge can see it. So
if you're going through some type of custody thing, I would encourage you to try to see what that app is and see how you can get it through your court system and utilize that. And remember, it's so important to try to be emotionless when it comes to reacting, because as emotional, I use OFW. What is OFW?
Our Family Wizard.
Our Family Wizard. Yeah, that's the one. So I don't know if anybody has any others in their state that they use.
That's the one. Our Family Wizard.
I agree. I think we need survivors to apply for judge jobs. Yeah, I agree with that too, because if more survivors were in that area and really there to help other survivors, they'd be able to navigate it a lot better. So what advice would you give? Anybody have any last minute questions you want to put for Katie in the comments? Please do before we free her. But what other thoughts do you have about post-separation abuse that you'd really like to share with those that are watching?
So the big things that I want to tell people is, some of the biggest things that I always, hear people say to me is, how can I support, my loved one who's dealing with this? Or another one that I actually get surprisingly often is, what do I do when I have a loved one who's doing this? Like, what if Kanye's friend called me up and said, how do I get Kanye to stop doing this? And I would say, pull him off social media. Like say, I get it, dude. She's all the things. She's this, she's whatever you want to say to your friend. Have him come out with you for a coffee or a beer or whatever and sit down and talk about it. And those are the type of things that you say to your friend. Those aren't the type of things that you say to your 7,000 Instagram followers.
Yeah.
And so I always, tell people just, show support, listen, don't engage with it. A lot of times people, unfortunately, they really like the drama and they don't realize that it's at the expense of someone's safety and someone's well-being. And so they're like, oh, it's just like normal breakup stuff. That's how the court sees it, how the police often see it. And that's sometimes, unfortunately, how the public see it. They see, oh, this is just normal breakup stuff. People
Nothing
break up and
about it.
Post about each other. No, it's not. What he's doing is, people are living in fear. And so I always tell people, don't engage with it. Don't comment on it. And don't engage with the person. Maybe get them to redirect it.
You talked about the drama, and I think part of being in an abusive relationship is that go back and forth abusive. You're used to the chaos that it brings. And so it's like a detox out of your system. Like having a healthy relationship shows you that the chaos is not normal, right? But you're used to the back and forth of the chaos. And so when it comes at you again, even after leaving, you always want to go back and forth, but you have to remember, keep it necessary, emotionless, and breathe.
Yes.
So I want to touch on two things really quickly. I always tell survivors, right? You don't need to meet them one last time. Post-separation abuse is so important because so many survivors do not survive after leaving. And we need to emphasize that. We want you to know that, people always say like, oh, they would never hurt me or the children. They would never, and it's just not a true statement. Then never say never. When someone has lost everything that they've had, you don't know what to do.
Yes. Yes. When they've lost everything.
Yeah.
And they
when they've been outed. When they've been outed and when people know what they really like, or the accusations are coming out and people are learning what the things that they've been doing behind closed doors, they feel like they have nothing to lose. And so I've talked to survivors' families, and I know that one last time, or they asked to meet one more time, or you'll see it in the news. Oh, they wanted me to return their items. So we met one last time and that person didn't make it out.
And they didn't make it out. Your items are not worth it. And that's actually something I talk about in my book. Like when you're planning to leave, take, copies of your deed, copies of your mortgage, take those earrings that your mom gave you for college graduation, put them in the trunk of your car, put them in a safe at work, like take those things out slowly. So that way, when you eventually do leave, you're not meeting in a parking lot somewhere to exchange, the shoes that you needed or whatever. The shoes aren't worth it. Yeah. All the stuff that's worth it, get the stuff out, the kids' passports, the, all of your copies of stuff like that, your deeds, that kind of stuff, paperwork, birth certificates. And another thing too, I want to say too, kind of switching gears a little bit, is like an MO, like the modus operandi of an abusive person is to claim that they were victimized. And so a lot of times, the court system is they're kind of scratching their heads. The police are scratching their heads. So that is another thing that's very common. And that is why it's really important not to engage for things like any of the post-separation tactics, any kind of smear campaign, because you don't want any doubt in their mind that you could be part of this, because that is their MO to say, no, she's the crazy one, or no, he's the abusive one, and then point the finger back and say that they were victimized. That is like almost textbook.
It happens all the time. Yeah. And they say, well, if they were so, why did they come over last night? Look, they will lure you back into bed with them.
Yes.
They will lure you they will lure you, and then they'll tell a judge, look, if they were so afraid of me, why were they here?
Then why did they meet me? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I love what Sylvie said. She said, focus on your children. And I just want to take a second just to really encourage survivors that the post-separation abuse, you may be experiencing this, right? But I want you to know it won't always be like this. This is something that you can move past, that can, that you can be happy afterward. You can live a successful and a happy life after this. Don't let this stop you here. Don't quit here. See, what they'd like you to do is for you to quit in the midst of the chaos, and so that you'll decide to go back because it's just easier going back. But I want you to encourage to keep fighting for yourself and for your children, right? So that you can live a happy and whole life. You can do this, right? Don't let them keep you there. at all.
And it will.
Norma just came on. She's with Document the Abuse, and I shared earlier this week. Document the Abuse and Victim's Voice are both organizations that help you
I like
document.
Victim's Voice.
Yes, it's so important that you document what is going on. If you're at a place now, right, and you know that you're still in a relationship or you're out and you need to document what's happening because people aren't believing you, or you just want to make sure you have it, please reach out to these two organizations. Go down our page. You'll see the links there. Please, please, please. I remember documenting, right? And then he would say he was sorry, so I would throw it all away. And then I would document it again. And I didn't even call it document, Katie. It was just journaling. And I would write, well, this happened today on this date, and this happened today on this date. Then you would apologize, and then I'd rip it out, and then I throw it away because then it didn't happen, right? But I want to encourage you because there's going to come a point. I remember sitting in court thinking, I wish I had these pages and pages of notes.
Yes, the journals.
Yeah, so
I've seen journals get people a protection order.
See, it's so important, and both of those programs really help you. We're not saying keep it under your bed so the abuser will find it, right? But there are safe ways to be able to document it. We want to encourage you to do that. So, somebody had a question. Sorry, in the comments. When does a post-separation abuse?
I like that question.
And it feels like it will never stop.
So, and here's the thing, because it really depends, I mean, it depends on the pathology of the person you're dealing with. If you're dealing with someone who is extremely malicious and out for revenge, or, the extreme end of the spectrum. And, that's usually when the victims, it's the most dangerous, because usually what'll happen is there's a cooling off period after a breakup. And most people, you're angry when you first break up and you're, talking about the other person, and that's kind of normal. But then there's almost like a cooling off period. And then, years later, you kind of forget why you're mad at them. That's pretty normal. But what happens with these people is that, if they're really malicious and they're really out to get you, and a lot of times, I mean, they don't have that cooling off period. They're going to be just as mad at you 5 years from now as they were 5 days after you left. And that's when it's the most dangerous. However, that is not in every case that I've seen. A lot of times I do see cases where there is a cooling down period, which is why protection orders usually are set up for the amount of time that they're set up for, because studies do show that there is some kind of cooling off period for most people. So I would say, Ethan, that it's hard to say, but my number one thing is to just not engage, because the more you engage, the longer it'll go. Yeah. If you engage back and you try to defend every accusation, then you're looking at, 2 years versus 1. I mean, I've seen some after 3 or 4 months move on and find a new partner and leave the ex alone, which is sometimes ideal. And unfortunately, although we wouldn't wish that on someone else. But then another time I've seen people 3, 4, 5 years later still dealing with the retaliation. So it really does depend on the situation.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if they move on, oftentimes you'll see that it digresses. But I'm telling you, oftentimes, that they will now create this smear campaign or this, and they will turn the abuse on you, or not tell their new partner the things that have really occurred in their relationship. Or not tell the ex at all really what happened. And so you have that as well. And I'm going to also share too, that they work hard to turn people against you. And
very hard. And they're skilled at it.
It could be family. It could be your best friend, closest friends. And it's so interesting, Katie, because earlier, I think earlier this week or today or something, we shared about, if I'm friends with your abuser, just say the word and I'll delete them, or something similar. And it's so interesting how many survivors commented and said, oh no, they still come over for dinner, or they still best friends with my whatever. And it's heartbreaking, because when a survivor needs you, that's that time. It's when they're leaving, they need you like no other time, and they're not finding the support that they need. And it's so important. If you're listening and you know a survivor, love a survivor, care about a survivor, I would just ask that you believe the survivor and support them in the ways, because what the abuser will do that you may not know is go to your page and get the information about that person against them.
And I always tell people it is not worth it to have the mutual friends, especially on social media. Maybe months or years down the line, you can sit and have coffee and and move on years down the line, if it's a type of situation that is, conducive to that. However, it's not worth it. That coworker that you had a couple of years ago when you worked together, at Walmart, delete them.
Yeah.
You know,
And
you
that's
don't
okay.
need mutual friends.
You don't need mutual friends. I don't know how many, and I know some people say, well, I have to stay friends for court. You know, that's neither here nor there. But I'm gonna, like, we just encourage you. You don't need to stay friends with them. You don't need to know what they're doing. Not only is it not healthy for you to know, but the mutual.
Block.
Remember, it's so funny because I can go back to like 2000. I don't know when, but
Yeah.
every mutual friend we had, I said, hey, just want you to know we're getting divorced, and I am going to unfriend you. If at any time you feel like friending me back, once you're unfriended with him, let me know. I took it in my own hands. You can't wait for them to make that decision. That's your decision to make. So if you
I
need
always
to
tell
cut
people,
off,
make
then
the decision for them.
yeah, there you go. Make the decision for them. Don't
Mhm.
wait for them to, oh my goodness, I want to be so supportive for Katie. Let me unfriend this person. You're not going to get that. It doesn't always happen that way. You may get a few that are willing to do that. And then you may get some who want to know both sides of the story. You don't need anybody to know both sides of the
You
story.
don't need anyone if they're not with you. And it's not about a power struggle. I always say, don't get into a back and forth with them. Just wish them the best.
Yep.
Maybe someday we'll cross paths again if it's meant to be.
But for your sanity, I always say unfriend. You don't need to know what the abuser is doing. You don't need to know who they're dating. You don't need to know if they got the new job. You don't need to know. I'm telling you.
It'll suck you back in. Yeah.
It'll
re-traumatize you.
Yourself from it. Detox yourself from it. And you know, I mean, I was that person. I went back. I tried to make my marriage work. I wanted to know. You didn't need to know. But when I started to distance myself, I found myself further and further away from the chaos. Right.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage you, and you don't have to have mutual friends. I don't care if it's your mama. It doesn't matter. If it's unhealthy for you and unsafe for you, there's nothing wrong with cutting that partnership off until, like Katie says, you're at a place where you can do it safely.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
Everyone's not going to understand what you went through. That's fine, but you do. So you take that power and control into your own hands and make sure that you are safe. I love that. Sylvie said, defend yourself in court only.
Yes, and I wanted to piggyback off of that is, you know, if you find yourself having to defend yourself, especially to mutual friends, you know, family, please cut them off, because you are going to re-traumatize yourself because you're finding that you're having to defend yourself.
Yeah.
That's really traumatizing.
For years. You've been trying to stay alive for years. You don't have to continue to do it afterward. You have the ability to take control of your life moving forward. Okay, another question. And then, okay, how do you make sure that you continue to stay away from those type of people?
You mean
talking about people who are friends, mutual friends, maybe?
You mean malicious people, like perpetrators, abusive people, or mutual friends?
Good question.
Let me answer it for like abusive people, as I would say, like, look for red flags. And again, it's hard because, you know, again, here we are putting the blame on the victim, like, oh, look for red flags and notice this and notice that, when really we should be telling people, hey, you know, don't be malicious and don't treat people horribly. However, you know, look at red flags. I actually posted a blog about that recently, about the top 5 red flags, you know, when you're dating. Okay, so they said other narcissistic. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing I always tell people look at what's their level of empathy. You know, how do they treat other people, not just you. In fact, that's actually not the most telling, is how they treat you in the beginning. It's how they treat other people. Watch how they treat wait staff. Watch how they treat people who can do nothing for them, like the people on the street begging for money, you know, the children who accidentally walk in front of them. Watch how they treat those people.
I think that's good too. And I would add, like, I would say, focus on you getting better, right?
Yeah.
Focus on yourself getting healthy and strong, and be able to recognize a green flag, you know, being able to recognize what's healthy and what's not, what your boundaries are, what you find to be good and not good, you know. And I think that is going to begin to change the people that you're attracted to, the people that you even look at. You may see someone that you thought was attractive, and then they're rude to the waitstaff, or they're disrespectful to their mother, and you're like, yeah, that's not my kind of person, you know. But because you built yourself up so strong that you're not willing to accept or tolerate just anything.
And doing your own work too. And of course, you know, I know I'm biased. I'm a therapist, so I'm going to give that plug. But do work on yourself. You know, getting into those wounds of, like, why did I ignore those red flags? You know, why did I stay past the expiration date of this relationship? You know,
that's good. I like what you said, getting into those wounds. I thought that was a really good statement, getting into those wounds. Because why didn't I? And I think we don't victim blame, but we need to self-assess, right?
Yeah, self-assess.
So let's self-assess this thing, you know, and say, well, Lisa, why did you? Or how do you make sure that doesn't happen again? Or where's some places that you can get stronger so that moving forward, you stop that immediately, you know? And
get your boundaries strong. I like that, Sylvie.
Yeah, that's so good. So it's so important. Like, even when I teach middle school or high school students, I say, well, if I come up to you, Katie, and I slap you, right? And you don't stop me. Guess what I'm doing next time? I might slap you twice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I come up to you and I look to do something to you and your hand immediately raises to stop me, guess what? I've learned that Katie doesn't like that. Katie doesn't allow that. It's simple. And I like to use that with the middle school students because they're so handsy and they like to play. But if you set a boundary,
It's a good descriptor,
yeah, when you set a boundary up, you require the other person to work inside that boundary. If they don't, they're just not your people in that moment in the season in your life. And that's okay. I remember when I first left, I started saying no to people because I was such a people pleaser.
Yeah.
I wanted everybody to like me, right? And so I started saying no. And my little sister, she goes, well, we just need to get you a billboard that says, Lisa says no, or something like that. And I said, well, let's get the billboard then, because I'd never just said no. Could you watch my kids? Could you do this? Could you do that? I started saying no.
Wow.
And just sitting in that no and not being afraid to say no. Let me tell you some survivors, right? Katie and I agree. You have a voice, you have feelings, you have needs, and you have desires that deserve to be heard and honored. Sit in those feelings, sit in those desires that you have and be okay with them.
And allowing yourself to know that the feelings are okay too. A lot of times there's so much self-blame with survivors. Well, you should have noticed the red flags, or you should have done this, or you should have left. I mean, judges will even say that. Why just say?
If it was so bad, why didn't you just leave?
Mm-hmm. Well, you stayed.
If it was that bad, you would have left. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, thank you, Katie. You're awesome. Katie, you want to put your book up? You guys, she just recently sent several copies for Love at the Center. It's Invisible Bruises, Navigate, How to Better. Can you read that? Because I need glasses. How to Better Navigate.
How a better understanding of the patterns of domestic violence can help survivors navigate the legal system.
Yes, wonderful. And it's on our page. There's also a link, and we'll also add it later today as well. She also does private practice, and she has Clara's Voice on Instagram and on Facebook. She does a lot of videos and things that help you with anxiety and calming down and focus and grounding and making sure that you are okay every day. So thank you so much for joining me again, Katie.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice to talk about this topic.
I know. I love it. Thank you so much, Katie. You guys, I'll see you later. See you later, Katie.